My dear brothers and sisters in the love of Christ, in 2015, the African nations came together for an all-African assembly. This assembly took place in South Africa. It was a wonderful success, and part of that success was in no small measure due to our speaker. Those of us who were present were impressed by the presentation given by Gushwell Brooks, a presentation that was knowledgeable, informative, and stimulating. Mr. Brooks is currently the Communications Officer for the Jesuit Refugee Service, JRS, in the Southern African region. So could I ask you to show in the true Vincentian way a welcome to our guest speaker.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I should say thank you to Brian for inviting me here. If I knew I was going to have the toughest job, and that is to talk to people immediately after lunch, after a very busy day, I would have probably said no at the time. But I'm very happy to be here, and it's honestly an absolute pleasure. The one thing I should have mentioned to Brian is that I've been a member of St. Vincent de Paul in my home parish in Braamfontein for more than 10 years now. I was the vice president in that particular conference for about 2 years, but I had to vacate my seat because of work. And I didn't have the time to volunteer as much. So I have a very strong connection with St. Vincent de Paul, and I should say it's an absolute pleasure to be with you this afternoon. But as Brian very correctly pointed out, I am the communications officer for Jesuit Refugee Service, Southern Africa, and I'm here to talk to you about refugees and asylum seekers and other displaced people. And the reason why I'm talking to you about them is because I'm sure in the work that you do, you come across a lot of these people. So who are they? And how is it that Jesuit Refugee Service and St. Vincent, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul can work together to make these people's lives easier? Let's get cracking. So some of the things that we're going to look at is, first of all, we're going to look at obviously the work of Jesuit Refugee Service with asylum seekers, refugees, as well as displaced persons. We're also going to look at how we can work together, as I mentioned earlier on. And there's 4 questions that we need to ask ourselves in essence here. Is what is the global situation pertaining to refugees? And who is Jesuit Refugee Service? What is it that Jesuit Refugee Service does at a regional as well as at an international level? And how can we actually work together as 2 different organizations? So the United Nations has a definition for who a refugee and asylum seeker is. And I'm going to try to simplify it for you. So what happens is that if someone leaves their country based on those reasons pointed out there, right? And these are people that belong to a particular social group, a particular nationality, ethnicity, whatever else. So if it's because of conflict, if it's because of war, because of persecution, and they leave their country, they enter countries as asylum seekers. So in other words, these are people that say, hang on, I'm in trouble at home because there's a war, or because of the color of my skin, or because of who I pray to, or because of whatever situation I find myself in, whatever special group I'm in, I might lose my life, and my family might lose their life as well. So those people leave their countries, go to another country, and they're first an asylum seeker. After some time, after whichever hosting nation has come to a particular decision, they can give those people refugee status. So currently in the world, we have approximately 60 million people. In 2014, and the reason why I'm quoting 2014 statistics is because the UNHCR, or the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, updates their statistics every June. So the latest statistics are not available yet. So I'm using last year's statistics. But based on just the information that we had last year, there were 60 million displaced people throughout the world. To give you an idea of how many people there is that if you had to take all those people and you had to put them into one country, they'd be the 24th largest nation in the world. That's how many people are displaced at the moment. These are some of the statistics that shows you where people find themselves. Where have people been granted the most amount of protection? The next slide is a little clearer. So, I'm sure at this point you're asking yourself, who on earth is the Jesuit Refugee Service? Now, like the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, there's a bit of history behind this. So, Father Padre Rupe, a few years ago, in 1980, 2 years before I was born, noticed that there were all these people from the Vietnam War that were displaced. They were called the boat people at the time. They were living on boats. And what he decided to do was that there was something that needed to be done for these people. They needed to be taken in, they needed to be shown some form of hospitality, and they needed to return to some type of a normal life. Unfortunately, he passed away just before he saw his dream being realized, but that was the starting point. Jesuit Refugee Service obviously has an international structure as well as regional structures. And our international office is actually based here in Rome, and I will be visiting them sometime tomorrow, just to tell them that, hi, I'm here. And some of them would probably be seeing me for the first time because I'm based in Southern Africa. But the interesting thing is we've launched a new campaign called Mercy in Motion. As you heard, and I'm very much aware that people in this room know that this is the Jubilee Year of Mercy. So as part of our Jubilee Year of Mercy, part of our contribution to that, we want to educate another 100,000 refugee children by the year 2020. And for that, we need $35 million US. So there's an active drive to raise money for this process. Because just because children are refugees and some of them are living in camps and some of them are living in cities where they weren't born, does not mean that they don't have a right to education. And I'm sure as you all, in the work that we do, with poor people, with people at the margins, you know for a fact that once you give someone an education, you've given them an opportunity. I'm right at the bottom of the map in Southern Africa, in Johannesburg, and the countries that I work in is South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, as well as Angola, in the top corner. And we have 2 sites in South Africa. It's in Johannesburg and Pretoria. Pretoria and Johannesburg is about 50 kilometers apart. And then in Malawi, we work in Dzaleka refugee camp. And because of a new crisis or a new number of refugees in Malawi, we have a second site in Kapise and Mwanza. I'll tell you a little more about that a little later on. And then in Angola, we largely work with urban refugees in Luanda. And in Zimbabwe, we have a refugee camp, or we work in a refugee camp there in Tongogara. So I'll tell you a little more about the various countries. You get 2 types of refugees, just to clarify for you. So some countries allow refugees to have freedom of movement, like South Africa, at the moment. So if you're a refugee, you're allowed to work, and you're allowed to go to school, and you're allowed to access public health and all those facilities that South Africans can access. There are limitations on certain rights, but overall, they have very similar rights to citizens. However, some countries have an encampment policy. So which means that if you're an asylum seeker, if you're a refugee, you have to go live in a camp. And living in that camp means that you're not allowed to leave that camp without permission. You're not allowed to work in the mainstream economy. So you can't leave the camp and go and work in the office every single day. It's impossible. Your children can't go to the local school. So in other words, those are the 2 models that we have. And I'll tell you how we've been working in both those models. So in Angola and in Johannesburg, or in South Africa rather, we have urban refugees. In Zimbabwe and Malawi, we have people living in camps. So let's start with Angola. This is the first sign that you'll see when you get to Angola for JRS. As I said, there's approximately 48,000 people living in Angola. The work that we do in Angola is largely based on advocacy. And as you know, Jesuit Refugee Service, our motto is to accompany, serve, and advocate on behalf of refugees. It's extremely important. And the reason why is because we need to fight for the rights of refugees. So in other words, governments need to be told at times that you need to protect the rights of these people. It's one thing to give them services like education, it's one thing to give them food, but at times you need to protect their rights. And that's most of the work that we do in Angola. This group of women, the most amazing thing about them is that they were in the northern part of Angola, in a very rural part of Angola, in Lunda North. And unfortunately, that portion of the program we had to close. But the amazing thing is that they got together with the assistance of Jesuit Refugee Service, and they combating sexual violence within their community. So they're protecting themselves from rape and from all kinds of other abuses by having formed this group of women that counsel each other and educate each other. And the unfortunate thing is I spoke to 4 of these ladies randomly, and all 4 of those women were subject to some of the most horrific sexual crimes that you can think of. And the good thing is that they're able to stand up for themselves, and that's why advocacy is so important. The next country that we're going to look at is Malawi. This is obviously in the encampment environment. There's approximately 24,000 people living in this camp. It's called Dzaleka. It's approximately 45 kilometers outside of Lilongwe. It's a country that's going through a lot of poverty in itself, and therefore the government cannot afford to spend money on refugees. And that is just the truth. So Jesuit Refugee Service has played a significant role within that community, and I'll tell you a bit more about it now as we continue. So in total, the number of school kids that we put through school is approximately 6,300 in total. And I'll tell you why, because even though we have about 700 kids in high school, we have 5,300 in primary school. And we have approximately 300 at nursery school level. So as you can see, in Dzaleka refugee camp, we provide all the education. This year is part of our vocational skills training program. So what happens is that these people are being taught to be carpenters. Some of them are being taught to be motor mechanics, and I think I have some photos of that as well. And you might ask yourself, why is it that if someone is not able to work in the formal economy, would we be giving them those skills? Dzaleka is not a closed-off camp. It's not fenced in. So even though the refugees and the asylum seekers can't leave the camp, locals come in, and those locals bring with them money. And there's trade between the communities. The Jesuit, this year is the Jesuit Refugee Service in Jesuit Commons Higher Education at the Margins. Now, how many of you would believe me if I told you that these are tertiary educated students that you're looking at in that photo? And they're living in a refugee camp. And they go through a 3-year program that gives them an opportunity to become teachers, to provide social assistance within the community, or even start their own businesses. So they walk away with a tertiary education, with a diploma after 3 years. And this was the last year's cohort that graduated. This, unfortunately, is the new situation that we have. Since December, we've had approximately 11,000 Mozambican refugees stream into Malawi. So a second camp has literally been set up. So we have 2 camps at the moment, and that's why at the moment we have approximately 35,000 people in Malawi. This is a brand new camp. As you can see, the conditions are very difficult. At the moment, it's literally people living under plastic bags, tents, and trying to put together their own shelters. So, as I said, it's very difficult in South Africa because we're dealing with urban refugees. And this is just a photo of Johannesburg that I took. It's a very difficult city, lots of crime, lots of opportunity, but it's a tough city, if you get my drift. These women are in our Arupe Center in Johannesburg. So all these ladies that you see here are being taught how to do beadworking, how to make their dresses, how to do hairdressing, a range of things. And the reason why we do this is because we give them this training for 3 months. Afterwards, they can go out, we give them a little startup package, and with that startup package, they can go start their own businesses. So if they were taught in dressmaking, then they get a little sewing machine with some material, and they can go sell whatever dresses they make. If they were taught baking, they get a small oven and ingredients, and they can go and bake muffins and scones and those types of things. And it's a very successful program. This is our home-based care project. they look after people with illnesses. This young man here, unfortunately, what happened to him was that his mum, who's holding him, he has hydrocephaly. Does anyone know what hydrocephaly is? Water on the brain. So he has a lifelong disability. And what had happened with Dieu Merci, that's his name, was that their village came under attack in the Congo. It was in the middle of the night, and his mom grabbed him. His mom is holding him at the moment. She grabbed him. She put him on her back. He was only 2 months old, and they took off running. And all that she heard were bullets and fires and people screaming in the back. And when they finally came to rest, she realized that the baby wasn't on her back anymore. What had happened was that the cloth that she'd taken to wrap him around her back had ripped, and he fell off. And so, as a result, he has a lifelong brain injury as a result of that. But what do? This family are provided with the necessary medical assistance that they need. We make sure that we get him to the hospital and back, that he takes the medication that he requires. And both the parents are very well trained. They do excellent physio on him. This is the last one. This is Zimbabwe, Tongogara, heat and dust. And this is sort of what the camp looks like. As you can see, or rather 10,000 people approximately living in the camp. Oops. And that's Father David Holdcroft. As I said earlier, my boss, this was at last year's vocational skills training graduation. So these are people that have been trained in a range of things. Some of them make furniture, proper couches that you can sit on and buy. And this is our sewing group. And they, for me, very amazing, because guess what? The school that we run, the high school, we run the high school in Tongogara, and they supply the uniforms for the high school, right? So the children within the camp that go to the secondary school get their uniforms from the sewing group. The uniforms are supplied free of charge, obviously, to the refugees, but someone has to pay for it. So we buy the uniforms from these people that we've trained within the camp, and that's how we've empowered them. And they're obviously doing a whole bunch of other interesting things. They make graduation gowns, they make clothes for people, and they buy and they sell these clothes. And this is the chicken project. Now, the piggery, as well as the chickens, the thing that they have in common is that they cater for single women. And single women, as you know, are very vulnerable. These women actually came to Jesuit Refugee Service and said, we do not want to engage in sex work. We don't. But we need jobs because we don't have husbands and we don't have people, men, to look after us. We need to be independent. And we don't want to work where we're going to be abused and used. So that's how we came up with the piggery project and the chicken project. So they're raising all kinds of animals, rabbits, chickens, quails, pigs, goats, you name it, it's probably there. The next slide is our entire regional team. This is now all for the men. It's the senior management team within the region. And we had our recent meeting, and those are the people that's responsible for all those projects that are outlined. So what is it that I told you today? What is it that you need to take away from this? I think the most important thing is that you need to understand that you are probably the first people that will encounter refugees and asylum seekers in the work that you do. Because we, as St. Vincent, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, we work with poor people, right? And refugees and asylum seekers are generally poor people. Because when they leave, they don't have time to apply for visas. They don't have time to make sure that the bank account balances out. They don't have time to transfer properties and sell cars. They need to go immediately. And what tends to happen is that even very successful people end up in their countries of final destination as very poor people. I'm sure our friends from Lebanon can attest to that. People from Syria, we had a gentleman from Syria, from Iraq. People leave everything behind when they leave. And who are the first organizations that they tend to come into contact with? It's St. Vincent, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. So I think the first thing is we need to be sensitive to understanding why those people are in our country so that we can help in protecting them against people that don't understand them, at times our own governments. And the second step is to be able to get into contact with organizations like the Jesuit Refugee Service and say to them that those guys can actually help you with some of the things that we can't help you with.